The silence inside the Smoky Ridge Chapel wasn't holy. It was cruel. Rosalie Gatlin felt it first not in her ears, but in her bones like frost slipping beneath the skin. She sat motionless in her chair near the front, her mother's wedding dress clinging to her legs like a memory she couldn't shake. Her hands trembled faintly in her lap, though the room wasn't cold. It was the kind of silence that doesn't come from reverence but from people holding back laughter. The chapel was full, but not with love. They hadn't come to bless her. They came to watch her shame. Someone coughed in the back row, sharp mocking. Another whisper followed. Thought they were jokin' when they said she was really going through with it. She ain't walkin' down no aisle, that's for damn sure. The voice belonged to Wade Coulter, and Rosalie knew it. You didn't forget the sound of a man's voice when it had laughed in the background of your screams. Her father hadn't come. Neither had her brother. They'd sold her name and called it mercy. A man to care for her, they said. Someone who could handle the burden. But Rosalie knew what this was: exile disguised as vows. And the man waiting at the altar. Elias Boone stood tall in the shadows of the pulpit, hat in his calloused hands, eyes like slate under the dusty sunlight that spilled through the church's windows. He hadn't said more than 3 words since they met. No smile, no nod. Just a quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt loaded, like the pause before a rifle's crack. A mountain man, a ghost from the woods. The kind of man people warned you about until they needed someone to fix their roof for cheap. And now he was her husband-to-be. Reverend Lang cleared his throat. We gather here today to witness a union of souls, he began, voice quivering, of 2 lives joined under the eyes of the Lord. Rosalie barely heard him. Her heart thudded in her ears like hooves on packed earth. She looked down at her hands, thin pale, still bearing the faint scars of the fire. Her wedding ring felt like iron, heavy, binding. I give it a week, someone whispered behind her. Boone'll disappear before supper. Wade's laughter came next, low and sharp. Hell, I thought the only thing smokin' that night was the barn. Guess her legs cooked, too. Gasps rippled through the room, but no one stopped him. Rosalie's throat clenched. She couldn't breathe. Not because of the heat, not because of the dress, but because every single word felt like they were setting her on fire again. Then wood creaked. 1 step, another. Elias Boone stepped down from the altar boots, landing slow and heavy. The room held its breath. Even the Reverend went still, his Bible wilting in his hands. Elias didn't speak. He didn't rush. He walked through the center aisle, eyes locked on Wade, who leaned against the church's wooden wall like the devil himself had poured him into a pair of boots. Wade smirked. Well, now if it ain't the groom. You lost something. Boone Elias stopped a foot away, looked him dead in the face. His voice was gravel and iron. If you speak again, you'll bleed on this floor. And I won't say it twice. The silence that followed was different. Not cruel, not curious. Afraid. Wade's smirk cracked. His friends shifted in their pews. No one dared laugh. Elias turned back to the altar without another word. The Reverend scrambled to resume. Rosalie sat frozen. Not from fear, but from something else. Something deeper. No man had ever stood between her and a monster. Not until now. The rest of the ceremony passed in a hush. Vows spoken just above a whisper. Rosalie's "I do" came out shaky. Elias's came out firm. When Reverend Lang said, "You may kiss the bride," Elias didn't. He simply nodded once and stepped back, offering the wheelchair's handle. Outside, the town waited. People lined the wooden boardwalks, pretending not to stare. Sheriff Glenn McCall stood by the church doors, arms crossed, eyes hard. He gave Elias a single respectful nod, the kind of gesture a man gives to someone he'd once hunted with or against. Elias returned the nod, then pushed Rosie down the ramp he'd built that morning with his own hands. The crowd watched. No claps, no cheers, just staring. "Never thought I'd see the day," someone muttered. "Poor girl," said another. "Would have been better off just leaving her in the mountains." Rosalie bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. The wood creaked beneath her wheels, and every inch forward felt like rolling over glass. Halfway down the road, Elias stopped. He turned her chair toward the woods. The trees stood still, golden in the afternoon light. The wind stirred faintly, carrying the scent of pine and distance. He crouched beside her. His voice was low, rough. "Do you want to go back?" She didn't look at him. Her voice cracked anyway. "No, I don't want them looking at me anymore." He nodded once. "Then we go." He lifted her into the wagon as if she were whole, not breakable. Her small trunk thumped behind them. The wheels rolled forward, leaving the chapel and the laughter behind. The town faded, but the silence remained. The wagon groaned as it climbed the narrow trail out of Smoky Ridge, wheels crunching over gravel and roots like brittle bones. Rosalie sat bundled in a wool coat too large for her, her dress wrinkled beneath it, her hands gripping the edge of the bench seat, as if afraid the mountain might swallow her whole. Beside her, Elias Boone said nothing. The reins rested in his weathered hands, knuckles, scarred fingers steady. His eyes stayed on the trail ahead, gray and still like fog over a cold river. Every now and then he'd give a low whistle to the mule team, but otherwise the ride passed in silence. Rosalie didn't ask where they were going. She hadn't asked anything since he lifted her into the wagon. There was nowhere else to go. She turned her head to watch the town shrink behind them. Smoky Ridge faded into trees, and distance its white chapel spire already gone from view. All that remained was the ache in her chest and the whispers still clinging to her like burrs. The climb grew steeper. The wagon leaned sideways around bends. Tall pines pressed in dense and watchful. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried once sharp and high. Rosalie let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You ever lived outside town?" Elias asked suddenly, voice gravel low. She blinked at the question. "No." He nodded once like that made sense. "It's different. Quieter." She glanced at him. "Quieter than back there." He didn't smile, but something in his face shifted. A flicker of dark humor like smoke curling from wet wood. Different kind of quiet. The road leveled out at last. A few more turns, and then the trees opened into a clearing, hugged by a creek, and backdropped by the blue-gray slope of the ridge. A one-room cabin stood near the waterline, its walls made of hand-hewn logs, the roof covered in moss and rusted tin. A porch sagged slightly at the edges. A stovepipe curled smoke into the autumn sky. Chickens clucked somewhere unseen. Rosalie stared at the place. It wasn't a home. It was a refuge, the kind built by a man who had stopped expecting company. Elias stopped the wagon and jumped down landing with a grunt. He moved to her side, offered a hand. She hesitated. He didn't rush her, just stood there waiting. She let him lift her carefully, not gently, and that mattered more, and carry her inside. The cabin smelled of pine pitch gun oil and old ash. Light filtered through crooked windows. A cot rested against one wall. A table stood under shelves filled with tools, books, tins, ropes, bullets. Everything had a place. Everything had wear. There were no mirrors. She noticed that first. No glass to catch her face. No reflection to remind her of what she'd become. He set her down in a wooden chair beside the hearth. The fire was low coals glowing soft red. "I'll bring your trunk in," Elias said. When he stepped back outside, Rosalie exhaled shakily. The silence here was thicker than town. Not hostile, not mocking, but deep like something that didn't want to be disturbed. She looked around. The floor was clean swept recently. A small rug lay beneath her chair. A single shelf held worn paperbacks, Zane Grey Twain, an old Bible with the spine taped. A rifle hung above the door, polished and ready. The walls closed in on her. She clenched her hands to keep from shaking. Outside, a screen door creaked. Footsteps. A soft knock. Then a woman's voice, sharp as a cane tap. "I brought cornbread, Boone. And if that bride of yours is hungry, it's still warm." Rosalie stiffened. Elias opened the door. "Mabel." "Well, don't stand there like a stump. Let me look at her." Rosalie turned as a woman stepped in mid-60s silver braid, tied back eyes like carved flint. She wore a faded skirt and carried a basket wrapped in cloth. Mabel Stokes looked Rosalie up and down. "So, you're the girl." Rosalie's mouth went dry. "Rosalie Gatlin." Mabel snorted. "I know who you are, child. Everyone with ears knows who you are." She shoved the basket into Elias's hands and marched toward the hearth. "You eat yet?" Rosalie blinked. "No, ma'am." "Then you will. Grief's got a belly like anything else, and it don't shrink easy." She pulled a tin plate off a shelf and began cutting the bread like she owned the place. Elias leaned against the doorframe. "You didn't say you were comin'. I don't answer to you, Boone." Mabel handed the plate to Rosalie. "Eat." She obeyed without thinking. The bread was warm, spiced, full of things that reminded her of kitchens she'd never walk through again. "Reckon you're wonderin' what kind of mess you stepped into," Mabel said, sitting across from her without invitation. Rosalie stared at her plate. "I won't lie," the old woman said. "He's not a talker. Keeps things inside like they might rot if they get air. But he ain't mean. Just hurt." Elias made a sound, half grunt, half warning. Mabel ignored him. "And you look like someone took your fire and left the smoke." Rosalie looked up. "Someone did." Mabel nodded once, satisfied. "Good. You ain't sugarcoating it. That's a start." Elias moved to the fire, stoked it with a practiced hand. Rosalie watched him. There was no wedding night, no tenderness, no promises. Just two strangers in a cabin with too much wood and too little warmth. When Mabel left, night had fallen. Crickets chirped in the brush. Elias bolted the door behind her and poured water into the basin. "You need help getting to the cot?" he asked. Rosalie shook her head. "I'll stay here." He didn't argue. She leaned back, eyes on the flames. Her legs ached with a kind of phantom pain she couldn't explain. Her heart ached worse. She felt like furniture, like something moved and placed but never invited. Elias sat on the other side of the fire, pulling off his boots with slow care. "I ain't what you wanted," he said finally, not looking at her. She didn't respond. He added, "But I'll keep you fed, keep you safe." Rosalie stared at the fire. Her throat burned. "I wasn't looking for anything," she whispered. "Just not to be forgotten." Elias didn't speak again. The fire snapped quietly. The air inside the cabin was still. Outside, the wind tugged at the pine boughs. In the dark, Rosalie let the tears come silent and hot. She didn't sob. She didn't collapse. She endured the way a mountain does, scarred, unmoving, and full of secrets. And when sleep took her, it was thin and restless. Morning came slow in the hollow, pushing through the trees like it had to earn its way in. Rosalie woke with her hands curled against her chest, and her dress wrinkled from sleeping upright. The fire had died to a dull orange glow. Outside, the creek murmured softly, as if whispering secrets she wasn't meant to understand. Elias was already gone. She didn't hear him leave. She never did. He moved like a shadow, quiet and wide-shouldered, never slamming a door or dragging his boots. He just disappeared into the woods at dawn and came back smelling like pine and smoke. Rosalie shifted in the chair, muscles stiff, arms aching. She wheeled herself to the table where the cornbread basket still sat, now cool but not stale. He'd left her coffee, too. Not in a mug, but in a small tin pot on the stove with a note scratched on brown paper, heat before drinking. Strong. E. She stared at the handwriting. Slanted. Sparse. Like the words didn't want to take up more space than necessary. Rosalie boiled the coffee and poured herself a cup, careful not to spill. Her arms were stronger than her legs, but they still trembled sometimes. She hated it. Hated how much help she needed. Hated needing to be grateful for simple things. After breakfast, she wheeled to the cabin window and watched the trees shift in the wind. Somewhere beyond that line of brush was the life she used to know, the barn dances, the early morning rides, the feeling of her boots hitting dirt with purpose. Now her boots were still clean, and her soul felt worn thin. That afternoon she explored. Not far, just the cabin. She rolled herself over uneven floorboards, noting every creak and slope. She opened cupboards, checked shelves. Not snooping, she told herself. Just understanding her new prison. Behind the bed frame, something caught her eye. A thin line of shadow that didn't match the rest of the wall. Curious, she pulled at it. The panel gave way with a soft pop. A hidden shelf. Inside was a leather-bound journal, cracked at the edges, pages stiff with time. A piece of twine held it closed. She hesitated. Then she untied it and opened to the first page. Property of J. Gatlin Smoky Ridge, 1882. Her breath caught. Her father's name. It wasn't the handwriting of Elias Boone, it was her father's, and it was unmistakable. She turned the pages, fingers numb. Notes on livestock. Equipment repairs. A record of births in the stables. But then tucked between two pages was a loose slip of paper. Yellowed. Almost falling apart. Sheriff Riggs' boy says the Coulter gang been running north fence at night. Told Elias to watch him. Kid's smart, but too soft. Still better than no one. He sees more than he says. She read it twice. Elias. Watching the Coulters. Before the fire. Rosalie closed the journal, hands shaking now. Not from weakness, but from something colder. Something that slithered beneath her ribs and curled around her spine. He had been there. Before the fire. Before her legs stopped working. Before her name became a burden. He'd known. When Elias returned later, his arms full of chopped kindling, she was waiting for him at the table. The journal sat in front of her like a loaded pistol. He froze in the doorway. "Where'd you find that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she met his eyes. "My father trusted you." Elias didn't move. He did. "And you watched them, didn't you, the Coulter gang?" His jaw tightened. He set the wood down slowly, piece by piece. I did. Her voice cracked like a dry twig. Then why didn't you stop it? He looked down. I didn't think they'd do what they did. That barn was our whole life, she whispered, and I was inside. Elias took a breath. I didn't know you were there, Rosie, but you were close enough to hear the screams. That landed hard. He looked like he'd been slapped. She turned her face away, eyes burning. She didn't want to cry in front of him. Not now. I didn't come back to hurt you, Elias said quietly. I came back to make it right. Rosalie stared at the fire, voice low. Then why keep the truth from me? His silence answered for him, because he couldn't face it. Because guilt was easier to carry when it stayed buried. The next few days passed with a new distance between them. Not cold, not hostile, just brittle, like a window pane under pressure, still holding but one tap from shattering. Mabel came by again, this time with Stu. She noticed the tension instantly and muttered something about men being too proud to bleed proper. Later that night, Rosalie sat reading by lamplight. Her legs were wrapped in a quilt. Elias sat across the room, whittling a length of cedar down to a narrow shaft. I was the one who pulled you out, he said suddenly. She looked up. He wasn't watching her. His knife moved slowly, carefully. You were screaming. Couldn't see a damn thing through the smoke. I heard horses crying. And then I heard you. Rosalie swallowed hard. I dragged you out by your shoulders. You were half burnt. I didn't even realize. I didn't know your legs were. He stopped. The silence between them filled with the hiss of the fire and the ticking of the mantel clock. I don't remember who carried me, she said quietly. You were unconscious. She nodded. I always thought I'd died that night. But I didn't. I just stopped being the girl I used to be. Elias set the cedar down. That girl didn't die. She just changed. She met his eyes. For a moment there was no distance. Just two broken people suspended in the same still air. She closed the book and looked back at the fire. Her voice was barely a breath. You're not the only one who hesitated, Elias. He said nothing, but something in his shoulders softened. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it wasn't anger anymore either. Just the start of something else. The smoke from the sheriff's pipe curled slow and lazy into the evening air, catching the gold of the dying sun like ghost trails. From the edge of the jailhouse porch, Sheriff Glenn McCall squinted down Main Street, eyes narrowed behind decades of dust and memory. He'd seen bad men come and go from Smoky Ridge. Most rode in loud and left bleeding. But not Wade Coulter. Wade was different. He was patient. Mean in the quiet ways. The kind of man who didn't bark unless he'd already sunk his teeth in. And now he was back. Rode in this morning, McCall muttered to Reverend Lang, who stood beside him, arms crossed, the old black book tight in his hands. Reverend Lang frowned. Alone, nope. Brought two, maybe three. Young, restless. One of 'em's Harlan Wicks. Lang blinked. I thought Harlan was working freight up near Johnson Pass. McCall gave a long, low nod. He was, until Wade dug him up. The Reverend rubbed his chin. And Elias haven't seen him since the wedding. McCall took a long pull from his pipe. But I reckon he'll know before sundown. Down the street, Wade Coulter stepped off his horse, like a man walking into his own house. Same swagger, same crooked smile, same black hat dipped too low, hiding the devil in his eyes. He tied the horse loose, didn't even check the knot. Confidence or just arrogance, it was hard to tell. People watched from porches and behind window shutters. Nobody greeted him, not even the barkeep. That was how you knew folks remembered. Wade lit a cigarette with a match struck off his boot heel, then turned to the younger man beside him. Harlan Wicks, tall, thin, too clean-looking to be in Coulter's crew. "You sure this fella Boone's still up there?" Wade asked, smoke curling from his lips. Harlan's jaw twitched. "Yeah. Cabin's tucked along the eastern fork of Crow Hollow. Keeps to himself mostly." Wade chuckled. "Hell, I ain't surprised. Men like him don't come down unless they got sins to carry." He tossed the spent match to the dirt. "And I reckon he's carrying plenty." Up in the hollow, Elias stood outside his cabin splitting wood. His strokes were measured precise, the kind of labor that kept a man honest. Sweat clung to his brow even as the temperature dropped, and the rhythm of the axe head striking wood echoed like a heartbeat through the trees. Rosalie watched from the porch. She hadn't said much since finding her father's journal. But she didn't avoid Elias anymore. She was watching him now with a different kind of silence. One that asked questions without pushing. One that listened between the lines. Elias didn't look at her as he worked, but he spoke anyway. "He's back." Rosalie blinked. "Who, Wade?" The axe landed with a heavy thud. She tightened her grip on the blanket across her lap. "How do you know I saw the smoke?" She glanced toward the tree line. "Town's that far, not the chimney kind. Campfire. Just past the ridge. That meant men. That meant riders. That meant eyes too close." Elias wiped his hands on a rag and finally looked at her. "Wade's not one to forget. And he sure as hell don't forgive." Rosalie's mouth went dry. "He's after you." He nodded. "Me. Maybe you. Maybe both." She looked down. "Then why are you still standing here chopping wood? Because we're gonna need it when the cold sets in." She stared at him. Not angry, just amazed. "You ever think about running?" He shook his head once. "I ran once. Long time ago. Still haven't stopped feeling it." They were quiet for a long moment, only the wind and axe filling the space between them. Then she asked, soft but steady, "What do we do if he comes here?" Elias didn't answer right away. He finished splitting one last log, stacked it carefully, then turned and met her eyes. "Then we don't let him leave." In town, Harlan Wicks sat alone at the saloon, staring into a glass of something too weak to drown what he was feeling. The piano was quiet. Even the bartender had wandered off. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, tense with something unspoken. Wade had told him they were just riding up to pay respects. But Harlan wasn't a kid anymore. He knew the look in Wade's eyes. He'd seen it before in the firelight. And he remembered Elias Boone, too. Not just as a mountain man, but as a man who'd once pulled him out of a mining tunnel when it collapsed years back. No words, no promises, just bloodied hands and resolve. "You owe that man," Harlan muttered to himself. And yet here he was, about to ride with the one who wanted him buried. Back at the cabin, Rosalie sat by the fire, the journal resting on her lap. She read the last entry her father had written. There were no warnings, no premonitions. Just a note about the price of feed and a reminder to fix the eastern fence line. Ordinary words, right before everything fell apart. Elias walked back inside, carrying a crate of ammunition. She looked up. "You really think he'll come here?" He paused. "It's what I'd do." "Then what are we waiting for?" He set the crate down. "A reason." She frowned. "A reason." He looked her in the eye. I'm done running, Rosie. But I'm not about to shoot a man just 'cause he's ugly. She almost smiled. Almost. Then she said, I want to learn to shoot. He blinked. What you said, we'd need wood when the cold comes. She looked at him levelly. Well, if fire's comin' before winter, I want to be ready. Elias studied her face. The fear was still there, but so was something sharper. Fire. Not the kind that burned barns. The kind that rebuilt women. He gave her a slow nod. Tomorrow, then. Outside, the wind shifted colder now. Elias stepped onto the porch again, rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked toward the tree line to where the ridge darkened with dusk. And he wasn't smiling. In the distance, Wade Coulter sat on his horse just beyond the ridge, watching smoke curl from the cabin's chimney. He tapped Harlan's shoulder. You sure this is the place? Harlan didn't answer right away. But when he finally did, his voice was low and tired. Yeah, it's the place. Wade grinned. Then come morning, let's see if Boone still remembers how to bleed. The storm rolled in hard and sudden, like it had been waiting for its cue. By sundown, the wind had turned sharp, scraping through the hollow, with the sound of torn canvas and old grudges. The cabin groaned under the weight of it, every board flexing, as rain slammed the tin roof in sheets. Inside, Elias had already bolted the shutters, braced the door with a timber beam, and checked the rifle twice. Now he stood by the window, staring into the dark jaw set like stone. Rosalie sat near the fire, her chair pulled close, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. The flickering lantern beside her threw long shadows across the floorboards. Neither of them spoke. Not at first. The storm didn't allow for it. It howled and clawed like something alive, dragging branches across the walls, rattling loose nails. Thunder cracked over the ridge loud enough to make the cabin's frame shudder. Finally, Elias stepped away from the window. His boots echoed across the floor. We've seen worse, he muttered. Rosalie looked at him. Have we? He hesitated. Maybe not together. She stared at the fire. What if this is the beginning of it? He sat across from her elbows on his knees. His hat hung on the wall behind him, damp and dripping. His shoulders looked heavier than they had a day ago. Storm'll pass, he said. She studied him for a long beat. Then will it? Elias didn't answer. Outside, lightning lit the trees for half a second, throwing the shadows of their bodies against the log walls. Then came the thunder, close and fast. Rosalie pulled the blanket tighter. You ever tell anyone else what you told me? He shook his head. So why me? Elias stared at the fire now. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. Because you were there. She nodded almost to herself. You think I don't remember that night. But I do, in pieces. The heat. The screaming. My hands trying to crawl. And then the arms that pulled me out. Elias looked up, eyes unreadable. You never said it was you, she said. Not until now, I couldn't. Why, he exhaled through his nose like the answer was too big to force through his mouth. I heard the horses first, he said. Then the flames. I was supposed to keep an eye on Coulter's gang while McCall was up north. That was my job. My only job. But I thought they were just drinking. Talking big like always. His hands clenched into fists. I hesitated. Rosalie didn't move. I heard the crack of the lantern breaking. Elias continued. Then the fire caught the hay. By the time I ran down the hill, the whole side of the barn was burning. Your father was inside trying to save the colts. He paused, swallowed hard. I saw him fall. The wind screamed through the cracks in the roof. Rain pounded like fists on the walls. I got you out, he said. But I was too damn slow. Rosalie's voice was barely a whisper. You didn't tell anyone. What good would it have done? She looked him straight in the face. It would have been the truth. He sat back, jaw twitching. I've lived with it every day, he said. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. Smell it. Your scream. It's the last thing I hear before I sleep. Rosalie's hand trembled. She gripped the blanket tighter. You married me out of guilt, she said. Elias flinched like she'd slapped him. I married you, he said slowly, because I thought maybe, just maybe, if I gave you something steady, something safe, it would matter more than the damage I caused. Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast. You should have let me choose. He nodded once. You're right. The silence that followed was thicker than any storm outside, and somehow louder. Rosalie turned towards the fire, her voice brittle. All my life I thought I was left behind, not saved, just abandoned. And now I find out the man who carried me out was the one who could have stopped it all. He didn't defend himself, didn't beg, didn't move. She turned back to him, searching his face. Why didn't you run, Elias? Like the others? He finally met her gaze. Because I saw your eyes in the fire, and I couldn't carry that look with me into the next town. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She looked down at her hands, still scarred, still trembling. I don't hate you, she said quietly. Elias blinked. I don't know why, she added, but I don't. He leaned forward. You should. I can't. Her voice cracked. Because even if you failed me back then, you're the only one who's stood by me since. He reached across the fire, slow and unsure. His hand hovered near hers. She let it touch. It was rough, warm, trembling. I can't change what I did, he said, but I'd give my life to carry what came of it. Rosalie closed her eyes. She didn't know if forgiveness was the right word. But whatever it was beginning. Outside, the thunder softened. The rain eased into rhythm. A hush settled over the hollow, like the mountain itself had exhaled. They sat there, hands joined between them, firelight dancing across their tired faces. Not lovers, not strangers. Something in between. Something that had survived the heat. The scent of wet cedar still clung to the air the morning after the storm, and the world outside looked scrubbed clean, like the land itself had taken a deep breath and started over. Rosalie sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the trees drip with silver and light. Her hands rested on her lap, her hair damp from the mist. Inside, Elias was cooking breakfast biscuits in the cast iron and leftover stew warming on the stove. She hadn't spoken much since the storm, not because she had nothing to say, but because some truths needed time to settle, like dust after gunfire, like ash after fire. But something inside her had changed. When Elias stepped onto the porch carrying 2 tin plates, she looked up and said plainly, I want to ride again. He froze mid-step. I'm not asking to be who I was, she added, just to remember what it felt like. Just once. Elias lowered the plates onto the table between them. His eyes searched hers. You sure know, she admitted. But I want to try anyway. He didn't hesitate after that. He just nodded and said, Then I'll build you something that'll make it possible. By mid-morning, Elias was sawing and sanding boards behind the cabin sleeves, rolled up sawdust clinging to his shirt. Rosalie watched him from her chair, the air rich with the sound of workwood meeting blade nails tapping in slow rhythm. He built a mounting platform from scratch, wide, sturdy, with rails she could grip. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong. That afternoon, Mabel Stokes showed up on her old mule, a bundle of dried herbs in one hand and a saddle blanket in the other. "I heard you want to ride again," she said, without so much as a hello. "About damn time." Rosalie smiled faintly. "Figured you'd say that." Mabel dismounted like a woman half her age and marched toward the cabin. "You've been sitting in that chair too long. Ain't healthy for the bones or the pride." Elias emerged from the back, wiping sweat from his brow. "I brought Bramble," he said simply, gesturing to the calm buckskin mare tethered to the post. "She's slow, gentle, smart enough not to scare easy." Rosalie stared at the horse for a long time. Her fingers curled around the arms of her chair. Mabel set the saddle blanket on her lap. "You ain't gonna do it all in one day. But if you don't start, you'll spend your whole life remembering instead of living." With a deep breath, Rosalie nodded. They rolled her toward the platform. The ramp Elias had built was wide enough to allow her chair to turn at the top. He stepped up beside her, lifted her slowly, carefully, like a man carrying not just a woman, but all her weight, all her doubt. Once she was seated in the saddle, the world shifted beneath her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her spine straightened. Her breath caught. Her legs, though useless, hung where they belonged, boots in stirrups, body upright. She gripped the horn and looked out across the clearing. The sky had never looked so open. Elias climbed up beside her on his own horse. Mabel gave Bramble a pat and stepped back, her eyes wet but proud. "Now don't go running off just 'cause the wind remembers your name," she said gruffly. Rosalie smiled, and for a moment the girl she used to be flickered through the woman she'd become. They rode slow, just to the creek and back. But it was enough. She didn't speak during the ride. Didn't need to. The rhythm of hooves, the sway of the saddle, the creak of leather, all of it spoke louder than words. It told her she wasn't done yet, that she could still be something even if it wasn't the same as before. When they returned, the light was changing gold, spilling through the branches like honey. Elias dismounted first and helped her down gently. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm not broken, Elias. Just different." He looked at her like he wanted to say something. Instead, he just said, "I know." That evening, as the sun bled over the ridge, Sheriff Glenn McCall rode up the trail. Elias met him at the porch. Rosalie watched from the window. The sheriff's face was tight. "He's moving," McCall said. Elias didn't ask who. "He's asking questions in town. Bought ammo from the freight station. Folks are nervous." Elias crossed his arms. "How many with him? 3, maybe 4. Harlan Wicks is still riding with him." Elias's jaw ticked. McCall glanced toward the cabin window where Rosalie sat framed in the light. "You gonna wait him out?" Elias shook his head. "No. But I ain't gonna shoot first either." The sheriff nodded once. "You need me. Send the hawk." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I know you still got that old bird," McCall muttered. "Trained him damn near better than my deputies." Elias smirked. "He's slower now. But he don't miss." McCall tipped his hat. "Neither do you." He turned his horse and rode back into the trees. Elias stood there for a while, watching the last light fade. Inside, Rosalie folded a quilt at the end of the bed, hands slow, thoughtful. "He's coming," she said when Elias walked in. He nodded. "How long soon?" She sat in silence for a moment. Then, you think he wants blood. Elias exhaled. He wants something. Might be blood. Might be pride. Rosalie stared into the fire. You ever wish you'd killed him that night? Elias didn't answer right away. I wish I'd done something, he said finally. Anything. She looked at him. You did. You saved me. His eyes lifted. Too late. No, she said, right on time. He walked over and crouched beside her, setting a small object in her hand. It was a cedar carving. A horse, small and rough, but strong. Sturdy. For the saddle shelf, he said. Rosalie turned it in her fingers. You think I'll ride alone someday? She asked. Elias gave a quiet smile. No. She frowned. Because I'll be riding beside you. That night, Elias slept lightly, one hand resting near his rifle. Rosalie woke once to the sound of wings. She looked out the window and saw the hawk circling high above the trees, catching wind off the ridgeline. A sign. A warning. Or maybe a promise. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settles over the ridge at dusk, but a heavy, unnatural stillness that crept through the trees like fog from a forgotten grave. Even the birds had gone quiet. The creek, always murmuring, sounded muffled as if holding its breath. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the clearing, with his hand resting on his rifle, eyes scanning the tree line. He could feel it in his bones, something wasn't right. The kind of wrong that didn't rattle pots or shout its name, but sat in your lungs like smoke before the flame. Behind him, Rosalie watched from the porch, her expression calm, but her eyes wide and alert. Her hands rested in her lap, gripping the arms of her chair, tight enough to blanch the knuckles. Anything, she asked. Elias didn't answer right away. Then quietly, no. And that's the problem. She didn't push further. She'd learned by now when to speak and when to let silence carry the weight. Elias turned and walked back toward the porch. They're close. Rosalie nodded. How close could be watching us already? Wade's smart, patient. He'll want to make it hurt. She stared out into the darkening woods. Then what do? We keep moving like we don't know they're here, Elias said. And we wait for him to blink first. 3 miles downridge, Wade Coulter crouched beside a dying fire, fingers dirty from digging into the earth. Harlan Wicks stood nearby, arms crossed, glancing over his shoulder like he expected ghosts to step out of the trees. They ain't stupid, Harlan muttered. Boone probably smelled us yesterday. Wade grinned, a thin curl of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Let him stew in it. I want him wide awake when I put him down. You sure about this? Harlan asked. Rosalie's up there too. She's got nothing to do with this. She's married to him, ain't she? Wade said, picking up a stick and stirring the coals. That's enough. Harlan stepped back. She's half the reason he stayed in these mountains. Ain't right dragging her into your mess. Wade stood slowly, his expression darkening. Don't talk to me about right. You forget who took you in when your old man kicked you out, who taught you to shoot. You'd be starving in a ditch somewhere if not for me. Harlan looked away. Wade jabbed the stick into the fire sparks flying. We ride at dawn. Back at the cabin, Elias was sharpening his hunting knife in long, deliberate strokes. The sound of steel on stone echoed in the stillness, a rhythm steady enough to calm nerves, his and hers. Rosalie wheeled closer. What if you don't come back? He didn't look up. Then you'll know it wasn't 'cause I ran. She hesitated. Don't go alone. I won't. Not yet. He set the blade down and met her gaze. But when the time comes, I need to draw them out. On my terms. She searched his face. Then take me with you. His jaw flexed. No. I'm not dead weight, Elias. I know the land. I know them. I was raised in their shadow. His voice lowered. That's exactly why I won't risk you. She looked away, her mouth tight. You think I can't handle it? I think I couldn't handle losing you, he said. The words fell heavy between them. Then Rosalie whispered, You already lost me once. Don't make the same mistake again. Elias said nothing. Instead, he stood across the room and pulled something down from the mantel, a weathered satchel wrapped in oilskin. He opened it, revealing 2 revolvers, clean and ready. One he handed to her. Her fingers trembled as she took it. Not from fear, but from memory. You still remember how he asked? Rosalie gave a small, bitter smile. I never forgot. That night the wind shifted again. It blew from the east, carrying the scent of horses and gun oil. Elias was already awake when the first twig snapped. He rolled from the cot, grabbed his rifle, and moved to the window. 3 silhouettes stood in the tree line, watching, waiting. He didn't raise his weapon. Not yet. Instead, he opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, moonlight glinting off the barrel of his Winchester. I see you, he called. No response. Just the creak of leather and the quiet breath of danger hanging in the air. You come here to talk or to die? Still silence. Then, from the dark, Wade Coulter's voice drifted out like a bad memory. We come to settle a score, Boone. You know which one. I know, Elias said. And you'll get your chance, but not tonight. You trying to negotiate your own funeral, Wade sneered. I'm offering a choice, Elias replied. You want blood, come take it tomorrow. Noon, meadow by the split rock, just you and me. Laughter rolled through the trees, sharp and hollow. You think I'd fight you fair? No, Elias said. But you'll want to. 'Cause if you don't, you'll be meeting me where I'm strongest. There was a pause. Then Wade said, Fine. But you better bring more than that busted rifle and your crippled bride. Elias's voice dropped low and cold. She's worth 10 of you. And if you touch her, I'll make sure your name's scraped off every grave in this state. A long silence. Then the shadows retreated. Slowly. Like wolves deciding to circle instead of strike. Elias stepped back inside. Rosalie waited just beyond the door, revolver in her lap, her eyes hard. You gave him a place, she said. Bought us time, Elias replied. And maybe bought him a grave. At dawn, Harlan Wicks stood at the edge of the clearing alone, watching the sunrise bleed across the sky like a wound. He held his saddlebag jaw clenched, heart pounding. He couldn't sleep. Not after hearing Wade talk about dragging her out if he had to. Not after remembering the girl Rosalie used to be the one who gave him her sandwich in 5th grade when he hadn't eaten in 2 days. Some debts didn't go away just 'cause life got mean. He reached into the bag and pulled out an old photo, Rosalie, her brother, and her father all laughing beside the barn that no longer stood. Then he mounted his horse and rode for Boone's cabin. He didn't know yet if he was coming to warn or to fight, but he knew one thing: he wasn't riding for Wade anymore. The sun stood high and merciless over Split Rock by the time Elias Boone arrived. It wasn't noon by the clock, but by the heat in the air and the silence of the trees. Everything in Smoky Ridge had gone still, like the land itself was bracing for what was about to happen. Split Rock wasn't much more than a cracked boulder weathered by time and wind, but it had history. Blood had soaked this soil before, and now fate had drawn its circle here again. Elias dismounted slow, methodical, his rifle slung across his back, revolver holstered at his side. He wasn't dressed for war, but he wasn't unprepared either. Canvas shirt, dust-worn jeans, his wedding band the only shine on him. Rosalie had insisted on coming. He'd said no. She'd stared him down until the word broke apart in his throat. Now she sat under a pine just off the clearing, revolver in her lap, eyes tracking every movement. If Wade wanted her to watch, she would, but it'd be on her terms. Elias stood in the center of the clearing, the wind catching the brim of his hat. He waited still as the rock beside him. Then came the sound, hooves fast and sure. Wade Coulter rode in first, his stallion kicking up dust like smoke. Behind him came two others. Harlan Wicks wasn't among them. That was the first surprise. Wade swung down from his horse with a casual grace that belied the violence in his stride. "Well, hell," he said, flashing that crooked smile. "Didn't think you'd show." "You talk too much," Elias said flatly. Wade's grin widened. "Still got that fire, huh?" Elias didn't answer. Wade stepped closer, letting the silence stretch. "I thought maybe marriage'd soften you up." Elias's hand didn't move, but his voice turned cold. "Careful." Wade laughed. "Oh, come on. She's a pretty thing even sitting down." From the tree line, Rosalie's fingers curled tighter around her revolver. But she didn't move. Not yet. Wade kept circling. "You know this ain't just about the barn. You know that, right?" Elias stayed still. "No. It's about the fact I didn't join you." Wade's expression turned. The charm slid off like snakeskin. "You left," he growled, "when things got real, when blood needed spilling." "I left when you turned," Elias replied. "You started burning what we were supposed to protect." Wade stopped walking. "And you still think you're better than me?" "I don't think," Elias said. "I know." For a beat, nothing moved. Then Wade drew. Elias was faster, but Wade had anticipated the first shot, twisted his body, grazing the bullet across his ribs. He fired back close enough to burn fabric, but Elias dove behind split rock. Gunfire exploded. The two men circled and ducked, lead tearing into the dirt, trees, and stone. One of Wade's men went down with a grunt, clutching his leg. The other returned fire from a ridge, pinning Elias in place. Rosalie moved. She rolled down the small embankment, lifting her revolver with steady arms. One shot cracked the man on the ridge, fell back, gun skittering from his hand. Wade turned at the sound, and Elias struck. He tackled Wade full force, both men crashing into the dirt, fists flying. The revolvers scattered. Blood and sweat mixed with dust as they rolled over rock and bone. "You always were the coward," Wade spat, striking Elias across the jaw. Elias answered with a knee to the gut, then drove his elbow down hard. They broke apart, panting, each crawling for their weapons. But someone else reached them first. Harlan Wicks. He stepped out from the trees, rifle raised. Sweat beaded at his brow, conflict clear in his face. "Don't," he said to Wade. Wade blinked, snarled. "You pickin' his side now, I'm pickin' the one that didn't burn a girl alive." That froze everything. Even Elias stopped crawling. Wade rose slowly, arms out, laughing, bitter. "You gonna shoot me now, boy? Gonna prove to the world you ain't soft?" Harlan's rifle didn't waver. "I ain't shootin' you," he said, "but I ain't lettin' you shoot them neither." Wade stared at him a moment, then lunged. The gun fired once. Wade hit the ground with a dull thud, clutching his side, groaning. Not dead, but done. Elias crawled to his knees, then stood fully. Dirt and blood streaked his face. He met Harlan's eyes. "You didn't have to do that," Elias said. "Yeah, I did," Harlan replied. Been a long time coming. He tossed the rifle down and walked away. They buried Wade's gunman before sunset. The other one limped back to town under his own power minus his pride. Wade, patched and bound, was loaded into a wagon Elias borrowed from the Stokes family. Sheriff McCall met them at the ridge. Had a feeling it'd go like this, the sheriff muttered, adjusting his hat. You press charges, Elias shook his head. Ain't worth it. McCall nodded. Still gonna keep him a while. Let the law have its say. Rosalie sat beside Elias, watching Wade's unconscious body rock with the wagon's slow roll. You think it's over? She asked quietly. Elias looked ahead. No. But I think the worst part is. She rested her hand on his. Back at the cabin, they sat by the fire. Rosalie's chair pulled close to Elias's side, his hand resting lightly on her knee. I saw you, she said, in that clearing. You didn't fight for revenge. He nodded. No. I fought for peace. She leaned her head against his arm. Then maybe we both found it. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind blew soft through the pines, and for the first time in years, neither of them flinched. The storm had passed. The blood had dried. The land had settled into an uneasy quiet, like it was holding its breath and waiting for something else to rise, something deeper than vengeance, heavier than regret. Elias spent the morning repairing fence posts along the west pasture, shirt soaked through with sweat, hands raw from rope and sun. The work felt good, honest, the kind of labor that didn't leave you looking over your shoulder. Back at the cabin, Rosalie was digging through a chest she hadn't touched in years. It sat at the foot of her father's old bed, the wood warped from time corners, chipped hinges rusted. She hadn't dared open it since the fire, not because it was locked, but because of what it might unlock inside her. But something about surviving Wade changed her. If fear had once been the padlock, then truth was now the key. She opened the lid. Inside were folded clothes, worn but neatly kept. A black and white photo of her parents on their wedding day. Her father's preacher collar frayed but pressed. And beneath it all, an old leather-bound ledger. Its edges cracked, corners buckled, pages yellowed with age. Rosalie drew it out slowly and blew the dust from its cover. There, tucked between two pages near the back, was a folded envelope. Her name written across it in her father's blocky, familiar hand. Rosalie. She didn't move for a long moment. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened it. My Rosie. If you're reading this, then life has dealt you a hand I prayed you'd never have to hold. I don't know what's left of the barn, the land, or your heart. But I want you to know something, none of this, none of it was your fault. I saw the way they looked at you. After the fire. After the doctors said what they said. You were never broken to me. You were never something to pity. You were my daughter, brave, wild, fierce. And you still are. There's something else I need you to know. Something I never had the courage to say while I was alive. It wasn't Elias's fault. Rosalie's breath hitched. She read on. That night I asked him not to tell you. I made him promise. I didn't want you growing up with the truth too heavy on your back. But I see now. Maybe I was wrong. Elias didn't run. He charged through the fire. Tried to pull me out first, but I was already too far gone. I made him leave me. Told him to take you instead. Told him if he stayed 1 second longer, I'd never forgive him. So if he's still there, if he's still by your side, then maybe, just maybe, you've both survived something more than fire. Maybe you've survived each other. And maybe that's the beginning of something stronger. I love you always. Pa Rosalie stared at the letter, her heart pounding. Tears welled but didn't fall. Her mind raced through every memory, every twisted version of the past she'd carried like iron in her bones. He had known, all this time. He'd carried her out, not because he failed her, but because he honored a dying man's wish. She closed the letter with shaking hands and hugged it to her chest. Outside, she found Elias stacking cut timber. His arms flexed as he hoisted a log into place, unaware she was watching. He turned when he heard her chair creak down the ramp. "You all right?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. She didn't answer right away, just rolled up beside him and held out the letter. He took it with hesitation, eyes scanning the page. When he looked up, his throat worked to form words that didn't come. "You kept it," she said softly. "All these years. You kept his truth." He nodded. "Didn't feel like mine to give." Rosalie exhaled slowly. "He was wrong. You should have told me." "I know. But I understand now," she added. "You did what he asked. You carried the blame because he asked you to. That's not weakness, Elias." His voice cracked. "Felt like it." She touched his hand. "Not anymore." They stood there in silence, the wind brushing past them, the woods rustling low like a choir of old ghosts finally settling down. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the pines, Elias lit the lantern and brought the ledger inside. He'd seen it before, but never had the heart to read it. Rosalie flipped through the pages beside him, rows of names, numbers, debts paid, offerings given. But mixed in were personal notes, prayers, half-written sermons. A life recorded between tasks. One entry stood out: EB delivered lumber. Refused payment again. Said guilt's its own price. Elias shook his head and smiled. Your old man had a sharp pen. Rosalie chuckled. He never missed a chance to lecture. Even in ink, toward the back of the book was a final page with a list of names. Some were crossed out, others circled. Wade's was there, but so was Elias's. Next to Elias's name, her father had written, "If anyone ever comes back to her, I hope it's him." Elias swallowed hard. Rosalie leaned her head against his shoulder. "You came back. I never really left." She took his hand in hers. "Then let's stop pretending we're still surviving." He looked at her. "We're not," he asked. "No," she said. "We're living now." The next morning, Elias saddled the mule and rode into town alone. Not for trouble, but for lumber, fencing, nails, and a bucket of white paint. At the hardware store, old Mabel met him at the counter. "You look lighter," she said, squinting up at him. Elias smiled. "Feel heavier, actually. Got a future to carry." She slapped the counter. "'Bout time." When he returned, Rosalie was in the garden bed, gloves on planting green beans. He held up the can of paint. She tilted her head. "You planning to paint the trees?" "Nope," Elias said. "I'm gonna build you something new. Fresh start." She smiled. "What is it you'll see?" He didn't need to say more, because for the first time in a long time, they both believed in what came next. The new cabin wasn't big. Just 2 rooms and a porch that faced east where the morning light spilled in soft and gold. But it was theirs, every nail driven, every beam lifted by hand, every board cut to fit a life reborn from ash. Elias built it beside the old foundation, not over it. They'd both agreed the past had its place, but it didn't need to hold the present hostage. Rosalie chose the colors whitewashed walls with blue trim like the wildflowers that grew on the ridge in spring. She painted them slowly, carefully, her hands stiff but steady. Elias watched her with quiet reverence, like she was writing something permanent on the land itself. There was peace in the work, a rhythm. Days passed like chapters honest sun warmed, filled with the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. They planted new seeds in the garden, hung curtains from hand-stitched linen, stacked firewood so high it cast its own shadow. For the first time in years, Rosalie laughed freely, and Elias did too. One afternoon, she found him carving again small animals out of cedar, little symbols of the world they were rebuilding. She picked one up, a tiny bear, and held it in her palm. "Who's this one for?" she asked. He gave a half smile. "Maybe us, both of us." "Why not strong? Scarred, still standing." She set it on the windowsill. "Then it needs a mate." He looked up. A mate. She gave him a sly smile. "You know, balance." That night they sat by the fire, wrapped in one blanket, her head on his chest, the stars shining clear through the porch beams above. "You think it's too late to have a future," she whispered. Elias pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We're already living it." But peace has a way of drawing out the parts of the past that refuse to die quietly. The knock came 2 days later. 3 slow raps on the cabin door. Firm. Familiar. Elias opened it, rifle just behind the doorframe. A man stood on the porch, weathered, tall, clean-shaven, but road-worn. He wore a faded union coat and carried a worn satchel. Elias's eyes narrowed. "You lost," the man shook his head. "I'm looking for Rosalie Boone." Rosalie wheeled herself forward from the kitchen. Her breath caught. "Samuel," she said. The man's eyes softened. "Hey, sis." Elias blinked. "Your brother." She nodded slowly, stunned. "I thought you were dead." Samuel stepped in cautiously. "You weren't the only one. Took me years to get out of that mess in Kansas. Then more time trying to find where the hell Boone's Hollow even was." Rosalie stared at him. "Why now?" Samuel set the satchel down. "I ain't here to stay. I'm passing through. But I had to see you. Had to see for myself you were real. Alive." She didn't move. "You missed the wedding, the fire, the fall." "I know," he said, "and I'll carry that the rest of my life." Elias watched him, arms folded. "What do you want from her?" Samuel turned. "Not money, not land. Just forgiveness, maybe. Or a few words before I ride on." Rosalie's voice was quiet but sharp. "You left us. You left me." "I didn't mean to," Samuel said. "I was 19, scared and dumb. I thought I was going to make something of myself." She clenched the arms of her chair. "You didn't write. Not once." He bowed his head. "Didn't think I deserved to." Elias glanced at Rosalie. She was shaking, barely noticeable but real. He stepped closer, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Samuel cleared his throat and opened the satchel. "I brought you this." He pulled out a weathered music box. Rosalie gasped. It was hers. Her mother's. The one that sat on her childhood dresser, long lost in the flames. "I bought it back from a trader in Dodge," Samuel said. "Didn't even know it was yours, till I saw the initials on the back." He held it out. Rosalie took it slowly, turned the brass key. A soft melody poured out, a little wobbly from age, but still familiar, still full of the lullabies their mother used to hum. Her eyes filled. For a long moment no one spoke. Then she said, "You can stay the night. Just one." Samuel nodded. "That's more than I hoped for." That evening they shared stew on the porch. Elias said little, but he watched everything. Samuel spoke of the war, of working cattle down south, of jail time and railroads. But there was truth in his voice, raw, unpolished, real. Rosalie listened, asked questions. Slowly, the steel in her posture softened. As the stars came out, Samuel looked to Elias. "You take care of her," Elias nodded once. "Every day." Samuel stared a long moment, then held out his hand. Elias didn't move at first. Then he shook it. Quick, firm, final. At dawn, Samuel saddled up to leave. Rosalie met him at the barn wrapped in a shawl, the music box resting on her lap. "I can't give you back the years," she said, "but I can give you this." He took the box, touched it to his chest. "I'll write this time," he promised. "You better," she said. He mounted up, gave one last glance at the cabin, then rode off. Elias appeared beside her a moment later, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. That was closure. He looked out toward the ridge. "Closure's a good thing." Rosalie looked at him and smiled. "No," she said. "Closure's a beginning." The first beans came in early that year. Rosalie sat in the garden bed with soil on her sleeves, pulling bright green pods from the vines, dropping them one by one into a basket on her lap. The sun warmed her shoulders, and birdsong floated down from the pines like a hymn. Behind her, the new cabin stood quiet and solid like it had always belonged. It felt like the land was breathing again. Elias stepped out of the barn shirt, half unbuttoned, sweat streaked down his back. He carried a saddlebag slung over one shoulder and a folded piece of paper tucked in his pocket. His steps were slower than usual, not from exhaustion, but from weight. The kind of weight you carry when you know something's about to change and you're the one who has to say it out loud. Rosalie glanced up. "You look like you lost a coin toss with a grizzly." He chuckled, wiping his brow. "That'd be easier than this." She tilted her head. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. Just walked over, crouched beside her, and placed the saddlebag on the ground between them. "I need to go," he said. Rosalie stilled. "Go where town first. Then, maybe beyond. Depends what I find." She studied his face, creased with hesitation, shadowed by something deeper. Why Elias pulled the folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. It was a letter, signed by the estate office of a man named Burton Langtree. The name meant nothing to her until she saw the handwriting. She looked back at Elias. "Your brother," he nodded. "Half-brother. Same father. Different roads." Rosalie read aloud softly. "He passed last winter. Left behind land. A blacksmith's shop. Said in the will that if I ever came home, it'd be mine." She looked up. "He's calling you back." Elias shook his head. "He's dead. But maybe it's time I stop running from the rest of what I left behind." Rosalie sat back in her chair, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're not a ghost, Elias. You don't owe the past your future." "I know," he said, "but I might owe it an answer." They sat in silence for a while, wind stirring the leaves around them. Finally she asked, "You want me to stop you?" "No," he said. "But I wanted to ask first, because I don't want to build this place just to leave it behind." Rosalie's throat tightened. "You're not leaving me, are you?" He met her eyes. "Never." She nodded slowly. "Then go. Find what you need to find. But promise me something. Anything. Come back. Not just with answers, but with peace." He left the next morning riding the same trail he'd once taken when he first came to Boone's Hollow. The sun had barely crested the ridge when he turned back one last time. Rosalie stood in the clearing, a scarf wrapped around her hair, waving slowly. He touched 2 fingers to his brim, then disappeared into the trees. The road to town was long and mostly quiet. He passed the Stokes place where Mabel lifted a hand from the porch and called out, "If you're not back by fall, I'm taking your garden." He smiled and promised nothing. He spent the night in town at the old ranger's quarters, which Sheriff McCall had kept intact for just such occasions. The sheriff stopped by with a bottle of something dark and sharp, and they sat under the stars, talking of things that mattered less than the space between them. "You gonna take that shop?" McCall asked. Elias looked down at the letter. "I don't know yet. You ever think maybe you were meant to fix things, not just survive them?" Elias smiled. "Lately, yeah. I've been thinking that exact thing." Rosalie spent the first few days keeping busy harvesting, canning, fixing up the porch swing. But the nights were harder. She reached for his hand in the dark more than once before remembering he wasn't there. By the 5th night, she took out her journal and began writing again. Letters she didn't send. Thoughts she hadn't spoken. Memories she had finally made peace with. On the 7th day, a knock came at the door. Not Elias, but Harlan Wicks. He stood there, hat in hand, eyes low. "I heard he left," he said. Rosalie nodded. "Just for a while. I figured maybe I could help around the place till he's back. Pay off some of the debt I still owe." She thought for a long moment, then opened the door wider. "The fence on the east side is leaning again." He smiled a little embarrassed. "I can fix that." In the town of Kilburn, Elias stood outside the blacksmith's shop that bore his family name, Langtree and Sons. It was shuttered windows caked with dust, the anvil inside untouched since winter. But the tools still hung on the walls. The forge could be revived. The land behind it held good soil. He walked the perimeter boots, crunching over dry leaves. He thought about staying. But then he closed his eyes and saw Rosalie's hands in the garden, her laughter on the porch, the cabin with the blue trim, the smell of cedar and stew and fresh-cut grass. He saw home. Not this place. Not anymore. He returned 2 days later. Rosalie was pruning tomatoes when she heard the horse. She wheeled to the edge of the porch, heart-pounding breath caught in her throat. Elias rode into the clearing with dust on his shoulders and light in his eyes. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He just dismounted, walked over, and knelt beside her. "I left something behind," he said. She touched his face. "What you?" He pulled a folded deed from his pocket. "I signed it over to the local parish. They'll turn the shop into a shelter. My brother would have liked that." Rosalie smiled. "So, you came home." "I never really left." They sat there for a while, listening to the wind, letting the silence settle around them again. Then she whispered, "Do you believe in second harvests?" He looked at her. "I do now." Summer settled over Boone's Hollow, like a warm hand on a worn shoulder, familiar, gentle, and patient. The creek sang again, swollen with meltwater, and wildflowers blushed across the meadow, with a defiance that only came from things that had once nearly died. Elias Boone stood in front of the new cabin, brushing sawdust from his hands, staring out across the field. A few yards away, Harlan Wicks hammered in the last fence post with rhythmic thuds, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, sweat pouring, but spirit steady. Could have used this kind of work ethic back in the day, Elias called. Harlan grinned. "Back in the day, I didn't know which end of a fence post went in the ground." They both laughed, a clean sound, full and free, untouched by the bitterness that once shadowed their past. Behind them, Rosalie stood at the edge of the porch, wearing a simple ivory dress that she'd sewn herself. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid, and a crown of sage and dogwood blossoms sat lightly atop her head. In her lap, a bouquet of wild lavender. She wasn't nervous. She was radiant. "Y'all are gonna make us late," she called, voice full of that dry amusement that always cut through the fog. Elias turned, and the moment he saw her, he stopped breathing. She smiled. "What?" He crossed the distance between them in 3 slow strides and knelt in front of her. Just didn't think anything this beautiful could survive so much fire. She reached for his hand. "We didn't survive it. We transformed it." The ceremony was small, quiet, and holy in a way that had nothing to do with scripture and everything to do with sincerity. It took place at the chapel down the ridge, one rebuilt from old lumber and new hope, where Elias had helped mend the rafters last fall. Only a handful of people came. Sheriff McCall, Mabel and her grown daughter, Harlan, a pair of traveling gospel singers who happened to pass through and offered a hymn just because it felt like the right place to sing. And when Rosalie wheeled down the aisle with her brother Samuel at her side, returned again, for this day clean-shaven and red-eyed, there wasn't a single soul who didn't feel the weight of what they were witnessing. Not just a wedding, but a resurrection. The preacher kept it brief per Rosalie's instructions. No grand speeches, no overly flowery vows. "Just this, I promise," Elias said, "to never run from what we've built, to honor what we've endured, and to face every storm by your side." And she answered with tears welling but never spilling, "And I promise to let myself be loved, fully, freely, without fear." When they kissed, the birds outside seemed to break into applause, and the wind carried the scent of pine and lilac through the open chapel doors, like the earth itself was breathing in relief. That evening, they returned to the cabin, arms linked, the setting sun casting long shadows behind them. A fire crackled in the hearth. Dinner was stew and cornbread and blackberry pie shared under the stars. They ate in comfortable silence, occasionally trading glances that said more than words ever could. Afterward, Elias carried her over the threshold, not because he had to, but because she asked him to, half joking, half serious. "I always wanted to know what that felt like," she whispered, as he set her gently on the quilted bed. He knelt beside her, resting his forehead against hers. "We got the whole rest of our lives to find out what everything feels like." She kissed him, slow and sure. Then they just held each other. For a long, long time. 2 scarred souls. 2 broken bodies. 1 complete heart. Weeks passed. The garden bloomed in full. Elias started carving furniture in his spare time, chairs, shelves, a cradle he swore was just for practice. Rosalie joined the town's readers' circle, traveling in on market days with baskets of tomatoes and pickled okra and copies of the book she'd begun to write, Ashes and Bloom. It wasn't fiction. It was their story. People cried when they read it, laughed when they heard her tell it. She didn't hide the pain. She didn't dress it up. She let it breathe. And in doing so, she gave others permission to let their wounds breathe too. One night in the dead quiet of summer, Elias woke to find Rosalie sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. He sat beside her, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You all right?" She nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" She looked up at the sky, how the worst parts of our lives still brought us here. How maybe we don't get to choose the fires, but we do get to choose what rises from the ashes. Elias considered that, then said, "You think people like us can ever be whole?" She turned to him, her eyes soft, fierce. We are whole. This right here is what wholeness looks like. Not perfect, not painless, but honest. Shared. He nodded, resting his head against hers. I'd walk through hell again, he said, if I knew you were on the other side. You already did, she whispered. And I was. The wind stirred the trees and the stars blinked above ancient and patient. For the first time in either of their lives, there was nothing left to outrun. No secrets left to bury. No ghosts left to silence. Just the quiet, sacred beauty of a life finally reclaimed. Together.